Before a woman could be ruined in Gilded Age Manhattan, she did not need a crime. She did not need a lover in the wrong hotel, a forged signature, a police wagon, or a headline folded across a breakfast table. Her name only had to stop appearing in the correct rooms, and once that absence became visible, the sentence had already begun. No judge pronounced it. No officer enforced it. No obituary later called it violence. A carriage did not stop at her door. A visiting card was not returned. A hostess let her eyes pass over the woman's face with the precision of an accountant declining a damaged note. In that moment, the victim remained alive, dressed, breathing, and technically free, while the future around her was quietly withdrawn. That was the weapon old Manhattan preferred. It did not cut the throat. It cut the invitation, the marriage prospect, the credit line, the opera box, the introduction, and the thin corridor through which a daughter might pass into protected life. The violence was efficient because it looked like manners. This was the machinery Caroline Astor perfected. The newspapers called it society. The families called it taste. Museums later called it heritage, because heritage is what power becomes after the invoices are removed and the servants are pushed out of the photograph. The more accurate word is registration. By the 1880s, Manhattan's ruling class had built an inspection system around women's bodies, men's money, family names, and the acceptable speed of ambition. It decided which daughters could be displayed, which fortunes could be washed, which marriages could be priced upward, and which families would remain rich but socially dead. Then, Alva Vanderbilt entered the machine with railroad money, architectural aggression, and a daughter whose future could be converted into British aristocracy. The guest list was a blade, but the hand holding it changed. The mansion was a pressure chamber, but the pressure was disguised as taste. The marriage contract was a liquidation order, though the newspapers described flowers. Consuelo Vanderbilt was not walking into a fairy tale. She was being entered into settlement. On February 16, 1892, the New York Times printed Ward McAllister's version of the 400, the supposed inner circle of New York society. The number sounded charming, almost theatrical, but its function was administrative. 400 names created a border around human value. The list did not invent exclusion. It made exclusion legible. Caroline Astor had trained the city before the list appeared, because lists usually arrive after enforcement has already taught people how to fear them. Her drawing room operated like a private immigration office, where fortunes could be admitted, delayed, marked vulgar, or refused without appeal. The procedure required no statute. It only required women to understand that a missed invitation could lower the marriage value of a daughter. That was the efficiency of the system. It punished without paperwork. Old New York did not need iron gates when it had seating charts, opera boxes, calling cards, receiving days, and women raised from childhood to notice every violation. A family could own railroads, banks, and blocks of Manhattan property, yet still stand outside one room waiting to be translated into legitimacy. New money had dollars. Old money had permission. Alva Vanderbilt understood the difference because she had been made to feel it. She had married William Kissam Vanderbilt, grandson of the Commodore, and inherited access to a fortune too large to ignore. Yet, the Vanderbilts still carried the odor of recent accumulation. Railroad capital was useful, but railroad wives were another matter. Mrs. Astor could spend money made by men like Vanderbilt. She did not have to receive their households. Alva's answer arrived as a party, but it functioned as coercion. On March 26, 1883, she opened the Vanderbilt mansion at 665th Avenue for a masquerade ball so expensive that the price itself became an instrument. Contemporary sources placed the cost around $250,000, with champagne, flowers, costumes, police, carriages, and press attention folded into one social weapon. The event was not entertainment. It was siege engineering with music. For weeks, young women rehearsed. Newspapers previewed costumes. Families calculated what absence would imply, and because everyone understood the mathematics of exclusion, the ball became central before the first carriage reached the door. Alva had not purchased amusement. She had purchased inevitability. Then she placed the blade exactly where Mrs. Astor could feel it. Carrie Astor wanted to attend. Alva could not invite her, she said, because Mrs. Astor had never formally called at the Vanderbilt house. The rule sounded petty only to people who misunderstand rituals. In Gilded Age Manhattan, a visiting card was not paper. It was recognition reduced to cardstock. Mrs. Astor crossed the line because her daughter's exclusion would cost more than surrender. She left the card. The invitation followed. That was a coup. Alva did not beg for entry, and she did not wait for old blood to develop generosity, a medical condition almost unknown among ruling families. She made refusal more damaging than compliance. By the time the guests arrived under electric light, the battle had already ended. The costumes only disguised the terms. Beneath the silk, diamonds, champagne, and choreographed movement, one dynasty forced another to revise the admission code. The social guillotine changed hands, and once Alva learned its mechanism, she did not dismantle it. She studied its hinges. After New York came Newport, where wealth stopped pretending it wanted modesty. Marble House rose at 596 Bellevue Avenue between 1888 and 1892, designed by Richard Morris Hunt for Alva and William K. Vanderbilt. It cost about $11 million, with marble imported and installed not merely to decorate a residence, but to manufacture permanence at architectural scale. It was called a summer cottage. That phrase deserves its own autopsy. Marble House did not simply shelter a family. It instructed witnesses. The walls performed what conversation could not, because stone can announce continuity without explaining where the money came from. In a city and resort culture obsessed with ancestry, architecture allowed a recent fortune to borrow the visual grammar of old empires. Architecture became compressed lineage. Inside, the house created a map of obedience. Public rooms expanded into ceremonial chambers where guests could be ranked by arrival time, sightline, and proximity to the host. The staircase did not merely connect floors. It staged descent as a social act, turning movement into theater before anyone had spoken. The staircase did not merely connect floors. It staged descent as a social act, turning movement into theater before anyone had spoken. The dining room did not merely hold food. It converted appetite into hierarchy. A person did not enter Marble House so much as submit to its sequence. First came the exterior mass, heavy enough to make resistance look temporary. Then came imported surfaces, proving that distance itself had been purchased. Then came the public rooms, where private life was widened until feeling had to become performance. The house processed people. The building also separated visible life from operational life, and that division is where the violence becomes measurable. The elite moved through marble halls, polished rooms, formal staircases, and decorated axes. Servants moved through rear stairs, corridors, kitchens, storage areas, and utility routes designed to keep labor close enough to function and distant enough to vanish. The system did not hide work because work was absent. It hid work because work made luxury look dependent. A mansion is not only what it shows, it is also what it prevents the guest from seeing. Every polished table required hands. Every heated room required fuel. Every dinner required bodies moving before, during, and after the conversation of people who later described themselves as self-made. Across Newport, The Elms made the same system more mechanical. Edward Berwin's fortune came from coal, and his house exposed the vertical truth of the Gilded Age with almost impolite clarity. Above ground, guests saw French-inspired formality, garden views, paintings, and controlled leisure. Below ground, servants handled kitchens, coal storage, boiler systems, laundry rooms, and the technical organs of comfort. The basement was the real engine. A warm ballroom required a furnace. A furnace required coal. Coal required delivery, storage, hauling, ash removal, ventilation, maintenance, and bodies trained to disappear before the guest noticed the temperature. The upper rooms performed refinement, while the lower rooms performed combustion, and the distance between the two was not moral. It was architectural. This was thermodynamics as class structure. The official servant tour now requires visitors to climb 120 stairs through the back routes of the house, from basement servant entrance to third-floor quarters, and then down again through the service anatomy of coal cellar, boiler room, laundry, and kitchens. The number matters because every stair converts elegance into work. A staircase can record labor better than a diary. Even the roof carried the same logic. Servants could be sent upward for air, laundry, or work, yet visibility remained controlled by roof lines, parapets, and viewing angles designed to preserve the guest's illusion below. A wall does not need to publish its height to perform censorship. It only has to block the sight line between garden leisure and working bodies. That is architectural erasure. Marble House belongs in that same audit. Its beauty is not separate from the discipline it imposed. The imported stone, ceremonial scale, divided movement, and orchestration of rooms all operated together. Alva did not merely want a house. She wanted an argument no rival could interrupt. A room could become a verdict. A hallway could become a command. A daughter could learn, long before marriage, that every space had a script, and every script belonged to someone else. Consuelo Vanderbilt was born on March 2, 1877, into a family whose fortune had already exceeded ordinary ambition. By adolescence, she was not simply a daughter in the sentimental sense. She was a negotiable asset attached to railroad money, maternal strategy, and a still unfinished campaign for recognition. Her private desire had poor legal standing. She loved Winthrop Rutherford, a man from old New York society whose name carried the kind of lineage Alva had once needed. That match might have satisfied an ordinary social climber because it joined Vanderbilt money to acceptable American blood. It did not satisfy Alva. By then, Manhattan was too small. Recognition from Mrs. Astor was no longer enough. Alva wanted a title that crossed the Atlantic. The selected buyer was Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough. He possessed what the Vanderbilts could not manufacture domestically: a dukedom, Blenheim Palace, European rank, and the cold residue of hereditary authority. He also needed money with the seriousness of a failing institution. The transaction was clean. Vanderbilt Capital would stabilize British title. British title would certify Vanderbilt assent. The emotional life of the bride was not a controlling document, and in systems built around property, feelings are usually admitted only after the deed is signed. On November 6, 1895, Consuelo married the Duke at St. Thomas Church in Manhattan. Newspapers recorded flowers, lace, crowds, police, gowns, jewels, and decorative abundance. Those details were not irrelevant. They were camouflage. A church can look like a fairyland while operating as a closing room. The marriage settlement was the real altar. The financial anatomy was not symbolic. The Duke received 50,000 shares of Beech Creek Railway Company stock, valued at $2.5 million, placed in trust for his income. The arrangement also included a guaranteed yearly income of $100,000, a figure that turns romance into arithmetic with very little assistance. The romance had columns. The Duke received rescue. Blenheim received oxygen. The Vanderbilt name received a duchess. Consuelo received a role requiring her body, her signature, her public stillness, and her capacity to cry without stopping the ceremony. The veil performed one administrative function. It made tears look ceremonial. Consuelo's resistance is what reveals the system. She did not drift into the marriage, and she was not merely guided by a mother with strong preferences. She was pressed toward it through household control, emotional leverage, and the kind of family authority that leaves fewer records than a court order, but can be more immediate than law. The room became a filter. The door became procedure. In her own memoir, Consuelo described the morning of the wedding as isolation rather than celebration. She spent it in tears, alone, with a footman posted at the door of her apartment, while even her governess was not admitted. That image is not theatrical decoration. It is the domestic version of custody. A footman is not a prison guard in the legal sense. He can still keep a bride inside. Later accounts and the 1926 annulment material sharpened the file. Time reported that Consuelo and her mother appeared before the Catholic Diocesan Court at Southwark, and deposed that parental duress had forced the 1895 consent. Other period reporting described Mrs. Belmont admitting that she had forced her daughter to marry. That is the archival crack. The wedding had been sold as alliance. The later testimony named coercion. The psychological mechanism was more efficient than simple command. Consuelo was made to believe that refusal could harm or even destroy her mother's health. Maternal illness became leverage, and obedience was reclassified as care. In that arrangement, a daughter resisting her own disposal could be framed as a daughter endangering the person disposing of her. That is psychological capture at its most durable. A daughter is not told only to surrender. She is made responsible for the suffering of the person commanding her surrender. If she resists, she becomes selfish. If she obeys, she is praised for duty. The trap works because every exit produces guilt. Alva did not need a public prison. She had a bedroom, a door, servants, reputation, doctors, newspapers, family pressure, and the full vocabulary of maternal sacrifice. On the morning of the wedding, Consuelo arrived late, with evidence of crying visible beneath the veil. The city outside saw spectacle, but inside the transaction required cosmetic management before the asset could be moved through the aisle. The body had to look transferable, even if the face had already started to testify. This is where elite female rivalry becomes more than gossip. The system trained women to enforce the market against one another. Mothers packaged daughters. Hostesses ranked rivals. Brides performed compliance. Male power remained central, but it did not have to appear in every room because the domestic field had already been militarized. The violence was delegated. Consuelo crossed the Atlantic as a duchess, yet the title did not reverse the terms. At Blenheim, she entered an estate older than Vanderbilt money and dependent on Vanderbilt money. The house needed her fortune more than it needed her happiness, and the Duke's economic needs sat behind the marriage like a second altar. A palace had eaten a girl. The marriage later separated, then dissolved, but by then the useful work had been completed. The palace had been supported. The alliance had been printed. Children had been born. The settlement had entered legal files, society pages, family trees, and public memory. The invoice was filed under romance. The Gilded Age did not end by confessing itself. It ended by curating itself. Weak histories lose the viewer here because they stop touching objects and begin worshipping abstractions. The archive does not work that way. Erasure is physical. Someone folds a letter. Someone removes a name from a guest book. Someone stores a settlement in a legal file and displays the wedding dress instead. Memory is handled by hand. A family tree records birth, marriage, issue, death, and sometimes divorce. It has no column for coercion. It has no symbol for a locked room, no margin for a footman at the door, and no annotation for consent manufactured under household pressure. The chart remains clean because its violence was never assigned a box. The obituary performs the same service. It compresses contested lives into acceptable nouns. Social leader, hostess, duchess, philanthropist, wife, mother Dei. The vocabulary is not always false, which makes it more useful. It preserves rank more efficiently than experience, because rank is easier to typeset and less likely to accuse the living. Museums inherit this problem and often polish it. A visitor sees marble, gilding, costume, furniture, ocean light, and a route through rooms domesticated by narration. The guide can describe architect, builder, construction date, stone, style, and provenance. The harder sentence is simpler. This room trained people. That sentence rarely sells tickets. Marble House remains because buildings are obedient witnesses. They do not contradict donors. They do not interrupt tours. They allow the public to admire surfaces before asking what those surfaces demanded from everyone inside them. A preserved mansion can launder power more quietly than a destroyed one. Destruction leaves suspicion. Preservation leaves brochures. The same laundering happens with the Vanderbilt ball. The surviving images invite costume analysis, fashion commentary, and amused astonishment at expense. Those are useful entry points, but they are not the file. The deeper question is why one woman had to stage an event costing $250,000 to make another woman leave a card on a tray. That card was the confession. The 400 survives as trivia, because trivia is harmless. A list of names sounds amusing. A social death registry sounds less suitable for brunch. Yet the mechanism was closer to credit scoring than friendship. The admitted name could borrow prestige. The excluded name paid interest in humiliation. The system worked because everyone understood the penalty. This is the psychological center of the story. The Astors did not merely exclude the Vanderbilts. They created a world in which exclusion felt like natural law. Alva did not merely defeat that world. She absorbed its operating manual, then applied the logic to Consuelo with greater intimacy than Mrs. Astor had ever applied it to her. The victim became an engineer. That is not hypocrisy. It is transmission. Power teaches the wounded to confuse entry with liberation. Once admitted, they often protect the gate more aggressively than those born beside it, because they remember the humiliation of waiting outside. Alva had been humiliated by withheld recognition, so she built rooms nobody could ignore. She had been denied social legitimacy, so she purchased aristocratic legitimacy through her daughter. The machine proved itself. By the 20th century, the violence had softened into costume drama. American heiresses became dollar princesses. British aristocrats became romantic figures. Mothers became ambitious. Daughters became tragic. Contracts became backstory. The language performed cleanup while the buildings did the slower work of glamour. Clean language is never innocent. Call it a match and the market disappears. Call it a wedding and the settlement disappears. Call it a mansion and the service corridor disappears. Call it heritage and the coercion disappears. The whole system survives by replacing verbs with nouns. Who did what to whom? That is the question every archive tries to avoid. A mother pressured a daughter. A father funded a contract. A duke accepted railway stock. A church hosted the transfer. Newspapers described the flowers. Later, museums preserved the rooms. Each participant handled one clean piece, and no single piece looked dirty enough to indict the machine. Respectability is modular. That is why these houses still matter. They are not only monuments to excess, they are administrative ruins of a social order that understood reputation as infrastructure. They show how wealth can turn private desire into public obligation, then teach descendants to admire the upholstery. The blade rarely touched skin. It moved through paper, rooms, women taught to police other women with perfect posture, and daughters whose tears were absorbed by lace, flowers, newsprint, and family strategy. It moved through servants whose labor warned rooms they were not meant to inhabit, and through museums that noticed craftsmanship before coercion. The evidence is still standing. A staircase can be a witness. A roof parapet can be a witness. A coal cellar can be a witness. A trust indenture can be a witness. A wedding veil can be a witness. The problem is not hidden evidence. The problem is beautiful evidence. Beauty slows suspicion. The next time a mansion is described as a fairy tale, inspect the contract beneath it. Fairy tales require transformation. These houses required compliance. The difference is legal, financial, architectural, and human. Caroline Astor guarded the register. Alva Vanderbilt broke into it. Then Alva used the logic of the register on her own child. That is the final audit finding. The social guillotine did not kill the body. It severed the future and left the portrait intact. If this archive is worth preserving, continue the investigation. Subscribe not as applause, but as access. These families left houses behind because houses do what witnesses often cannot. They remain standing.